Hey YouTube, what's up? This is Revere97. So the holiday thing that I was planning on didn't go as planned. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I got really sick with bronchitis, and of course that is never fun. And I just wasn't able to film very much as I wanted to. The only video I got around to doing was, of course, Rogue One, a Star Wars story review. But anyways, I know the holiday season's over, and I know this is probably when I was going to end it, but we're still going to try and do some reviews even throughout my school year, and I'm going to still try and stick with the Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing. But I thought for a little while, temporarily, on like a Thursday or a Tuesday, I would throw in trilogy reviews, or trilogy, you know, what I think of them, and different kinds of sagas and whatnot, because a lot of the times I've been asked, you know, not always by you guys, but, you know, I've been asked, what do you think of the trilogy as a whole? So, or what do you think of the series as a whole, or whatnot? And so I thought we would, you know, go over and do some of that. Now, of course, the first one I'm going to start with is the Star Wars saga, because, of course, of the release of Rogue One right now, and just a lot of different things, I think it'd be pretty good to do a review of the Star Wars movies. Now, these aren't going to be full in-depth reviews like I do with my other videos, but I do plan on making them, you know, not like in-depth, but, you know, in-depth enough to where you can get my gist about it, and it's going to be more on what I think of the series as a whole, and not just what do I think of one movie as a whole. Of course, I will have to talk about the movies a little bit, because they all make up the saga / trilogy, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it trilogy. So whatever makes up the trilogy. So yeah, so we'll get right into it. So this is going to be more of like a my thoughts deal on an entire like series or trilogy. So the rules for these are going to be they have to contain at least 3 or more movies, and they have to be well known. So if you guys want to request that I review a trilogy, please leave them down in the comments, and I will do what I can to try and review them. But anyway, so we're going to start with Star Wars. So the way I'm going to do it is, of course, I'm going to start off with the original trilogy, because that's the most proper way I think we can start this off, is starting with the original Star Wars trilogy, and then moving on to the prequel trilogy, and then after that, of course, moving on to the sequel trilogy, which so far just has episode 7, and hopefully this December we'll be seeing episode 8. So out of all of these, we're going to start with the original trilogy. Excuse me. I have a little bit of a cough still, so you guys might have to bear with me a little bit. So, so Star Wars, the original trilogy. The original trilogy, of course, I think is amazing. It's awesome. I love the storylines. I love pretty much everything about them. There's really nothing that I don't like about the original Star Wars trilogy. So I'm just going to break it up, give a little overview about each one, and then we'll talk about the trilogy. So, Episode 4, A New Hope. That is probably my favorite out of all of the Star Wars movies, because I think the reason I liked it so much was because it sets up pretty much the whole thing. And even though Episode 1 goes back even further to where you can see Anakin Skywalker, but, you know, I was able to understand pretty much a lot of the trilogy just from watching A New Hope. I remember the first time I saw A New Hope, I didn't see it, the version that pretty much everybody sees now, which is, of course, the version I own, that said Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope on the crawl. On the crawl that I saw, it just said Star Wars, and then, of course, it's a period of Civil War after that. So I got to see the original form of Star Wars, which is a version you really can't find nowadays, or it's kind of hard to find. But I kind of wish they would do it again, because it's kind of cool to watch it in that form. And I saw it without, you know, all the little add-ins and whatnot. And of course I saw the Han shot first version, so that was a real treat that I got to see. So I got to see Han shoot first. What more can I say? So Episode 4, of course, is my favorite out of all of them because to me I was able to understand the entire storyline and figure out what was going on without having to go back to the prequels and watch it. The prequels did give it a little bit more closure to where I was able to understand it, but I was able to understand it well enough with just watching episode 4. And that's probably why I liked it so much. And now we got, of course, episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. I also saw the original form of that, and Empire Strikes Back is probably my second favorite because it kind of separates the characters a little bit. Luke from Han and Leia. And that's the thing I loved about episode 5 was that you kind of got to see him, in different areas, and you got to see him, you got to see more of the relationship between Han and Leia, and then of course you got to see, it was pretty rare when they would put all three together. I mean, of course there was a few scenes where they did that, but most of the second half, they're kind of split because you have Luke who's on Dagobah doing his Jedi training with Yoda, and of course you also have Leia, Han, and Chewbacca, going on their mission. And that I like that because you got to see more of, you didn't always have them all together kind of like you did in the first movie. I'm not saying it's excuse me. I'm not saying that that's bad to have them all together, but it was just a little bit more interesting to see their separate storylines. And of course, I just liked it as a whole because there's just there's a million things I could say about this movie, but of course I'm trying not to because I'm not trying to do full in-depth review of this movie. I'm just trying to get my thoughts out. Now, Return of the Jedi, I did not see the original form of, unfortunately. I did see the version that said, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, with all the new add-ins, with that stupid dance sequence, with all the characters singing in the camera and whatnot. And just, the one with all the changes, pretty much. I didn't have a choice on that one because by the time I got to Return of the Jedi, that was the only version that was available. And so I had to, I had to deal with what I had. But I still loved Return of the Jedi because that's the one that kind of brings closure to the Star Wars, trilogy. Mostly because of the fact that, now Luke is becoming a Jedi, and, he has to face a few other trials before he can fully be a Jedi Knight. And that's what I liked about this. Of course, Jabba the Hutt surprised me the first time I saw him. I didn't expect that kind of thing when I first saw these movies, but of course now, what do I think of when I see Jabba the Hutt? Of course, the big fat ugly worm thing. I don't know what to call him, but anyways. So in Return of the Jedi, I like the fact that Luke, had to struggle, and he wasn't just gonna fight his father. Well, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen any of the Star Wars movies, I just spoiled something huge. So I hope you've at least seen the original trilogy. By the way, I also got to, I know I said that afterwards. Sorry if I ruined somebody's Star Wars adventures, but most people, I think, at this point know the truth about Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. And I also, the nice thing about episode 5 is I got the big suspense surprise. I was thrown off. I was like, what in the world did I just watch? He just said, the classic, of course, no, I am your father line. Which, surprisingly, that line gets misquoted a lot. So, obviously, most people should know that. So, I apologize if I spoiled it for anybody, but I think the majority of you knew that already, so I think we're good. So, episode 5, I got the big surprise of seeing that and being able to, be like, what? Instead of going 1, 2, 3, and you're like, oh yeah, I know Darth Vader is Luke's father. So, that was a nice thing. But in Return of the Jedi, I like how he wasn't just willing to fight Darth Vader, but he was also willing to bring him back. He felt that element of good in him, and he wanted to, bring him back to the light, and that's the thing, that was his main concern. He's kind of like, I'm not going to fight you. I feel the good in you, and I know I can bring you back. And he's also fighting his emotions, which Emperor Palpatine's putting in his mind. and you know, just a bunch of different things. And that's the thing I loved about Return of the Jedi. And the thing I love about it as a whole trilogy is there's a good element of conflict in each one of them that Luke has to resolve, of course, and all the characters have to resolve, of course. Han and Leia have their conflict, and I like the way that they played that out and whatnot. And the thing I also love is the graphics for the era. You know, 1977, you didn't have all like CGI and whatnot to be able to put in all these different things. You had to do it. So like even when I keep forgetting what they're called. I should know this because I'm a Star Wars fanatic, but I don't know what they're called. In Episode 5, when they're on the planet with the snow, and you see those things walking, those tall machine-like things. Like, I can't remember what they're called. I should know this, but I don't. So the thing I loved about that was how in the original version it was a stop-motion animation thing, and I thought it looked cooler in stop motion, you know, because when they redid it, of course, they made it all digital, and I thought it looked cooler in its original form. And so just seeing how they had to work with very little, but they still made it work, I thought was also amazing about the original trilogy. Whereas the prequels, they had the modern technology of, you know, with the lightsaber, they could just make a cool sound in a computer, whereas back then they had to take, I think it was like a tape reel and a couple other things to make the clashing sounds and the sounds of the lightsabers. And you know, the graphics even for the lightsabers at the time was incredible because it's a laser sword, and it's so cool to see that. And I think my thoughts on the trilogy as a whole is it was something that brought new ideas and a new form of filmmaking to the table, because you have Star Trek, which of course came before, but this is something totally different. Of course, Lucas was a Star Trek fan, but you know, I thought it was really cool to see that. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the different characters. Now, I know a few people have alluded to this already, but the characters I'm going to talk about are Grand Moff Tarkin, Count Dooku, and Darth Vader, because they all share something. So, of course, you know Grand Moff Tarkin is played by Peter Cushing in the original Star Wars trilogy, and if you've seen Rogue One, they did a CGI reincarnation of his face, so it's really cool that they did that. And of course, as we know in the original trilogy, bodybuilder David Prowse was the body figure of Darth Vader, not the voice. We all know that's James Earl Jones, but and then of course Christopher Lee was Count Dooku. They all share something though. They all were in the old classic Hammer horror films from the 1950s and 60s. Peter Cushing was Dr. Frankenstein in the Hammer movies, and of course I think he played Van Helsing in Horror of Dracula and a couple other Dracula movies. And of course Sir Christopher Lee is very well known for playing the role of Count Dracula in those movies. That's probably what got me into Dracula was the Draculas was of course Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. Not so much Gary Oldman and Frank Langella, but it was more so, like I said, you know, Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, because you know they're the icons kind of that image. And of course David Prowse, if you didn't know, played one of the monsters in, I think it was Horror Frankenstein, or it was Frankenstein the Monster from Hell. One of the two, I know he played the monster. So I thought that was really cool that they put them all, that they were all part of the Hammer series, but then George Lucas decided to put them in his movies. Even though, of course, Christopher Lee didn't come along until the prequel trilogy, it was still really cool to watch old Christopher Lee kick butt. I thought that was really cool. And he still had it for being, you know, much older at the time. And of course, you know, Peter Cushing as Governor Tarkin was probably one of my favorite villains of all time, other than of course Vader himself. So that's where I think I'm going to leave it with the original trilogy. The original trilogy is classic, and it's something that every Star Wars fan, in my opinion, should start with and then move to the prequels. However, if you want to do it the other way around, of course, that is perfectly fine as well. So that is my thoughts on the original Star Wars trilogy. Tune back in next Thursday where we'll go over the prequel trilogy, and tomorrow we will take a look at what is known as A New Hope. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and may the Force be with you.